Hi, my name's Ian Wallace. I call myself the Messed Up Counsellor, which is quite an intriguing name. And the podcast you're about to see is one of many, and we've been doing about a year now. So you can look back and see all the things we've talked about with guests and on my own over the process. A lot of the information I use in the podcast initially came from the first book I wrote in 2011. Why do we do that? What do we do about it? And that came out and was the basis of all my learning, understanding at that time, which is going back a few years now. And that process of understanding how the world works for people, how we can alter, change, and adapt it, was kind of what it was there to do with the initial stages. I've made that now an audiobook as well, so it's available on Amazon as an audio file that you can check out and you can download to your heart's content, and hopefully that will be helpful. In the podcasts, we're trying to look at all sorts of things about human interactions, human dynamics, the world, and how we might understand it more or change it more. So it gives you lots of ideas and tools in order to think about and look at different ways of being or dealing with things. And hopefully that brings people together and makes people more able to connect and communicate. Lots of topics. If you ever want to connect to me, just obviously drop me a comment on the podcast and I shall try as much as possible to reply. And if you've got any ideas of things that we might want to use on the podcasts, then please let me know. My name's Ian Wallace. Thanks for looking and thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. And today what I'd like to look at is something I've found a lot of the time within the work I do. People come to us, to counsellors, to look at the things that go wrong in their world and their life, quite naturally. For the person that is looking at that, then they concentrate. So if, for example, somebody came with confidence, self-esteem issues, and they said, I'm not confident in my world and my life. So that's not usually true. They will not be confident in some areas of their world and life, yes, that is true. But it won't be all their world and their life. But because they're not confident in the things they're thinking about, they use that as a benchmark of everything. So I'll say to them, okay, so did you drive here? And they'll say, yes, I drove. I drive an awful lot. I said, oh, so you're a confident driver? Well, yeah. Ah, right, okay. So where driving's concerned in your world and your life, we don't need to work on that. And we go through a process of trying to find the things that they are not confident with. So that might be about communication in relationships, for example. So when they walk in, they are not confident in their world and their life. That's the kind of 90% that they're focusing in on. But when we rearrange it, when we look at what they are confident in doing and what we don't need to work on, that's usually 10% of their life. But in their world, quite rightly, quite naturally, that 10% becomes 90%. Or that 20% becomes 80%. When we start thinking about it and looking at it and bringing it into some kind of reality, the things that they are not confident with, that's usually a small part of their world and their life. But because it's the most important thing to think about at that moment, it becomes this distorted view on percentage. So if we can move into changing their ideas, their kind of thoughts, ideas around this, and they can see that actually, no, I'm a competent driver and I'm a competent this and I'm a competent that and I've got confidence in doing this, that and the other. The part of my world and my life that I need to focus in on and change and alter and become confident is just my communication with people around me. Then that becomes 20% or 10%. When they move out of my office, my room, my area, then they've got a much better view of what their world is like. Their balance has been changed, altered. So they know they don't have to worry about the other aspects, the 80%, 90%. They only have to look at this 10 or 20%. But because we as human beings tend to focus on the things that don't happen or don't go well or the negative, and we do that to keep us safe, to be fair, it's kind of a primeval thing, I think. Then that focusing on the negatives, it becomes everything. But in fact, when you start analysing it and you start looking at it and start asking questions about it, it really isn't everything. And it's important we can get that balance changed. It's important we can look at that as a process, because then the reality is that 80% of my world works, 20% doesn't. So let's have a look at the 20% and see if we can get that to 90%. Yeah, you'll probably never get it 100%. But that process means we can bring a reality check into it. We can reduce that percentage process and reevaluate it and change it. And that can be really helpful for people in the work we do, because that aspect of the 20% that we need to work on, or the 10%, whichever breakdown you use, that then becomes easier for them to go out that door and live their world and their life, because their process has been changed, their thoughts, ideas has been changed. So they can relax with the things that are the 80%, but they can have much more concentration on the 20%. It means they don't have to spend as much time worrying, which is a good thing, or being anxious, or being scared, or feeling that they don't do things well, or they're bad people, or all those kind of negative connotations that come from this process. They can get a reality check and they can start looking at this 10 or 20%, and they can then give themselves a bit of a break. Now, what people do that engage with us sometimes is they will amplify that process for us in their conversation, in their communication. So partners, friends, people at work that we connect to might see the things that we don't do well, and they then can focus in on those things and they can enhance it. They can make it a much bigger deal. And that's not necessarily because they're bad people and they want to harm us or hurt us. They may be wanting to try and help us in their world. I mean, it won't necessarily be helpful in our world, but helpful in their world. So say, for example, somebody has a world that is about analysing, investigating, finding out, development and processes. So they may say to somebody, well, okay, this hasn't happened well. They may pick it up. They may bring focus and attention to it because that's one of their strengths, finding things that are wrong or things that don't fit or things that are out of place. They may be really good at that. So they focus in on that. So they may say to their friend or relationship partner, whoever, say, okay, they haven't done this. So they focus in on whatever this is. Now that is something they're good at. They think they're helping their partner to get better, develop, grow, find ways around whatever it is that didn't work. So the motivation is in a way positive. They want to help and they think they're doing that. But from the person who's receiving that information, it could seem as though they're being criticised. So if that is not discussed, not talked about, not shared, not understood, then that person who's receiving that message, it would reduce their confidence, self-esteem. It might create arguments in the relationship. It might give a feeling of rejection or resentment, all a host of negative aspects. So when we're doing this process, when we're focusing in on this 10 or 20%, The things around us, the relationships we have, the connections we have, can amplify that, as I've said. We have to get it into some kind of balance, some kind of understanding of the reality of the situation. And in that example of somebody wanting to help and bringing attention to things that we don't do well so we can develop or grow or get better, change, then we need to have a conversation with them. And we need to say, well, actually, that's kind of not helpful. And that means for me, how I'm picking it up, not how you're delivering it, but how I'm picking it up, it feels like it's a criticism. It feels like it's a process of telling me off, telling me of something I'm not good at. And if that happened on a regular basis, without that conversation, without being able to discuss it, to have a conversation, communication about it, how each person is feeling, then that criticism aspect would grow and grow and grow. And then that misconnection, that miscommunication, misunderstanding would, I would imagine, from the work I do, create a disconnection from the relationship, and one where both parties are not getting the best from the other. Because if we feel that we're being criticised, if we feel that we're being put down, all those kind of negative connotations, and our world is our reality, doesn't matter what anybody else tells us, then that's going to mean we're going to either withdraw, maybe, or we're going to create criticism back with the other person. So we'll pick up on the things they don't do well, because nobody does everything well. And then that creates this disconnection process, this kind of accusing, criticising aspect. Because if somebody criticised me, most people would want to strike back, criticise back, to kind of balance it, even it out. And so that process of feeling criticised would then enhance that aspect of low confidence or low self-esteem. So it would add to it. Now, they don't have to be big things. They can be short conversations. They don't have to be big arguments. But if we hear the same thing time and time and time again, then that amplifies it. It makes us feel it's more of a problem than it is, which allows that 80%, 20% figure to kind of come across. So we get worried about what else we don't do well, and we increase that aspect of criticism in self, in our own minds, because we can be our own worst enemies with that. We can criticize ourselves, which actually is harder to cope with sometimes. So we're in the room when we're talking with clients, we might find that they say to us, do you know? And they repeat this, do you know, right the way through their sentences, their information structures. Now, if somebody's doing that, likelihood is they're looking for some kind of connection, some kind of process that you give them that says, yes, I do know, yes, I am listening, yes, I do understand. But if they keep saying, do you know, then in their world, from their point of view, which isn't what you think you're doing, but our perception is our reality, then they don't feel as though you're listening, or they don't feel as though they've been heard, because they're looking for that feedback, they're looking for that valuation process. Same when people come in and they'll say to themselves, oh, that's silly, oh, that's daft, oh, I've done that again. All those kind of things of us putting ourselves down. Those, again, sometimes are trying to reaffirm that they're not that bad person. They're not the problem. And sometimes bringing reflection back into that, into the room, is helpful. Because a lot of the times we don't even know we're doing it. A lot of the times we use language we don't even realise what we're saying, to be fair. And if we can bring that into the room, into the counselling process, into the awareness process, so have you noticed that you keep doing this? I'm just wondering if you know you're doing that, and if you are, or whether you're doing it, I wonder what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to get from it. And have those kind of wider conversations, because it will be usually something around their character, their kind of process of sense of self, of valuation, respect of self. And if we can have that conversation, if we can bring that up in a non-judgmental way, a non-accusing way, as a wondering, as an awareness process, then they then can think about those ideas. Now, I'm not saying that would change what they do, but at least it'll bring it from a subconscious process of words to a conscious process of choice. That sometimes can be really instrumental in helping somebody to change, to see something different, to work the world differently. It can give them a sense of somebody's listening, somebody's realizing. And if underneath all of that there is this aspect of self-value and self-worth, firing those kind of conversational communication words, then having that conversation about, do you realize, what are you doing this for, can help them to instill that process of being listened to, because you've heard it and you're reflecting back on it, but also it can give them an idea of how they're impacting on somebody else. So that process can help them to change, to adopt a different style, a different type of conversational process, which means that everybody gets a better connection. Because our job, my job, anybody counselling or therapist that's looking at this, our job is to get people to be better with themselves and with other people, to change their world and their life in some way, shape or form that they feel that they're not happy with, or they're not achieving, or whatever it is they've come to us for. So if we can reflect that back, if we can reflect that idea back in their words, and give them that understanding, that process, maybe that will change that 80% I'm the problem to the 20%. And then we can get things into some kind of balance, some kind of reality check, some kind of understanding that actually this is the way it is. It's not how I think it is. This is how it is. And that can help them enormously to cope with that process. When we're doing that within our work, within our counselling process, when we're looking at these things with clients, then by reflecting back, by giving them that review of what they've said, and certainly if it's a constant, if it's a repeated pattern, if it's a one-off, probably not necessarily helpful. But if it's a repeated pattern of the same words being used time and time and time again in a derogatory sense, then that will help them to re-look at their self-value, self-worth, self-respect, and to increase their sense of self, because they can then modify that, change that, adapt that, and won't feel as rejected, won't feel as targeted. We can be our own worst critics, as I've said. And that message, if we keep giving ourselves that message that I'm not good, I'm bad, I don't do things well, whatever that negative process is, that holds more power than somebody else giving us it usually, because we do that not necessarily in words. We will do that in thoughts and ideas, and that's a constant, or it can be. So if we can change that, if we can alter that, if we can bring that understanding to them and change their ideas that this is not 80% that's wrong, it's 20% that's wrong, which is still needed to be worked on, still needed to be coped with and changed. But in the 80%, you can relax. You're okay. You can cope. You're all right. You do well. And you might do it very well, to be fair. So changing that 80-20, 90-10 kind of percentage combination to reevaluate it would be a helpful process for most people. Hopefully that's been interesting. And if you have any ideas or any thoughts of what you might want me to look at, or any kind of ideas or thoughts about what I say, and you can disagree with it, obviously, please let me know, and I'll bring it to further podcasts. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care. Hi, thanks for listening to the podcast, and hopefully it made sense and was interesting for you. Please subscribe, like, and share. With the podcasts, you never know who will be helped by the things we talk about, things we share. We don't normally tell people our problems, but by sharing it and helping other people to understand things. The book Insecurity, It's All About Me, is also available now through Amazon. And it gives you an understanding of what drives insecurity, how insecurity works within our human dynamics, and how you can get a much more secure connection with people. It gives you lots of ideas and thoughts, which is really good. So thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, share, hit the button. And if you've got any comments, please give me them, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much. Take care.